Hi, and welcome to the show. Siddarth Swaminathan did his graduation in Chennai in biomedical and bioengineering and then came to the US to study. He started out doing research work at some very large pharmaceutical companies in internship and then found that his interest was more in the business side of things, which then put a completely different spin on how his career is likely to evolve in future. This is an episode dedicated to those who think that getting into biomedical or biotechnology is only about the research side of things. And Siddharth is here to show us that there are business possibilities as well. This is episode 79 of the My First Job podcast, which covers engaging career journeys. And these journeys are full of twists, turns, and insights. And Siddharth is at the beginning of that journey. And he'll be telling us about what it means to look ahead and see what happens in future. And we'll have a perspective of what young people are today navigating and how they see it evolve in future. So Siddharth,
Hello, Mr.
welcome to the show.
Hello, Mr. Venu. Thanks for having me in this podcast. Look forward to speaking.
Okay, so Siddharth, why don't we start with your time in Chennai? Because that's where it began, and you must have had certain ideas at that point in time which changed as you came to the US.
Sure. I started my journey from Chennai. I would say, like, I did my schooling in PSBB Nagar, and like any student, I had no career ambition while I was studying. And my parents, although they were from science background, but they were in totally different field. Like my dad was in tech, and my mom was a teacher at PSBB. So, like, I was the first person in the family to be embarking on a research or a scientific journey. And although they have been like a great support system for me, but like all my influences, I would say, were from like a TV series. I would say, like, so when I was in a high school, I started watching a web series called House MD, which is like a Sherlock Holmes, but instead of solving crimes, here Doctor House solves like diagnosing patients and discovering what disease they had. So that was my early influence, I would say. And in my high school, I chose biology as a group, and I wanted to get into like medicine and be a doctor. So that was my very early influence. And while I moved on to my high school and I was studying biology in deeper, I started learning about genes and the cell biology. So those were like very fascinating for me. And that's when I thought again spun in my head to see like why not study what causes these disease rather than like treating the patients.
Okay.
So there was a twist again. So I thought like instead of being a doctor, now I should be like a scientist.
Hmm.
So that's where my journey started in Chennai. And at this point, I would also like to say, like my mom, like every summer, she used to like take students from different schools in Chennai as part of a PSBB IIT program to Shastra University. And
Okay.
so when she came back from these annual retreats, she used to like bring all the prospectors and all the research materials from Shastra, and they were like amazing. So I got a view of like what are the courses and what type of avenues are there that could compensate me by not doing a doctor. And that's where I thought like, okay, bioengineering is something a good option for me because it carried biology. It had like 60% of biology courses similar to say what a medical doctor would be doing, and 40% of engineering like biomedical instrumentation and biophysics. So that's where it all started.
Okay. And then what is the actual course like? Because you went into Shastra and did your BTech, right?
Yeah. So Shastra is like one of the best universities, I would say, for bio related field. So they had something. I mean, so actually during that time, like around 2010 to 2014, biotechnology was a buzzword, like in
Yeah.
India. whoever you ask will say like it has a huge scope and like it's going to be the next big thing in India. So I just got carried away by that, and but like I didn't choose biotechnology. I chose bioengineering, although
Okay.
they all sound similar, but it was not. So bioengineering at Shastra was like, so you had these basic biology courses like cell biology, molecular biology, biochemistry, and advanced biology like cancer biology, stem cell, neuroscience. So those were like very fascinating. So because I got to be like a doctor, but not actual doctor.
Okay.
And there was also like a lot of engineering aspect like biomedical instrumentation, biomechanics. So I had this career option like that I could either be a scientist or I could go into med techs and be like a instrumentation engineer or work with instruments. So the career options were like wide when I was doing my undergrad. And I got to like get into more the research part, and because like Shastra had wonderful labs, so they had like they are known for their research, so they had like the latest technologies and like a lot of funding. So I got to like go into labs and see, and like the program director was like one of the best mentors we had,
Okay.
and she was like very welcoming to students, and like she would take in students and give a glimpse of a lab and always talk with us like what's happening. So those were my early signs of like okay, I can do something in research. And the thing which changed my like the life decisions or decisions of going into research was when I got an opportunity to do my bachelor thesis at Harvard Medical School in Boston. So I got an opportunity to do my final semester at Harvard, and that's where my entire career took a change.
So what happened at Harvard? What changed there?
Sure. So at Harvard, I got to work in a bioengineering lab. So that was something
Hmm.
related to my field. So the professor was like one of the most like successful entrepreneur come professor, and he had this lab where they were working on automation and like uh, AI based biomedical engineering stuff. So one of the project which I was working on was like using a cell phone to detect antibody microbial resistance, which is
Okay.
like detecting whether a drug would be resistant to a particular bacteria or not. So
Okay.
that was one part of my research. So the other part was like, so at Boston, the best thing is like at one end of the street is MIT and the other end of the street is Harvard. So you can just go into any of these university, attend any lectures. So mostly since I was a student along with my other students, we just used to go there for free food because
Okay.
it was like the perks of attending lectures. So
Right.
with this aim of like going for the free food, I got a lot of science to add it along with the food. And so one particular lecture which took my brain away out was like a lecture by a professor called Ed Boyden. He's like one of the giants in this field of synthetic biology. So he discovered a new technology called optogenetics, which is using light to control neurons in the brain. And
Okay.
that just blew my mind. I was like, wow, this is interesting. I need to like dig deep and know like what's happening, because like brain is a fascinating organ, because you don't know exactly like what's happening inside the brain. There are like
Right.
lot of circuits and lot of like neurons interacting. So it takes a lot to understand the brain, and you can read the brain in three different layers: in the cellular layer, in the molecular layer, and behavior level. So I thought like, okay, I need to do something in brain research, and that drew my attention or
Interesting.
my
Yeah.
interest towards neuroscience.
So this was something that you got as part of your course at Shastra, or did you have to qualify for an exam to come to Harvard? How did
That
that
was
come
my
about?
exam. So my university had this semester abroad programs. So they had
Okay.
this tie up with different universities in Europe as well as in US.
Okay.
So I got selected for doing my thesis at Harvard. It was a selection process, I would say, and just based on like I need to like write a proposal or like write a scientific like article to say like what my interests are and why I want to do that. So luckily, I think I just got selected for that, and it was a great opportunity for me because first time coming out of India and like
Yeah.
experiencing lab, like because the labs in India are completely different than the
Right.
labs in US. So here, like, it was great interacting with different people from different countries, and it was a great experience for me. And like, to talk with professors and like all big players in this field was like an amazing opportunity, which I wouldn't have like got in India. But like again, I was lucky. So I came back to India after I finished my thesis, and I graduated from Shastra, and I had to be in India for a year before I can go back to US to do my masters. So during that period, I got an opportunity to do my internship, like as a research assistantship at National Center for Biological Science, which comes under the central government Department of Science and Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. So that's again like one of the premier institutes in the
Right.
India, and like that again I just like wrote to a professor. Her name was like Dr. Hiya Ghosh. She's like an amazing professor, and I asked her like I have this research interest and I want to like explore neuroscience and the field. So I just wrote like, can I come and like work with you as a intern? And she was like happy to accommodate me. And I just got an opportunity to again go to NCBS and again continue my exploration of like studying the brain and like studying different proteins. So that's where my research in neuroscience started.
So, what did you do at Tata Institute, TIFR?
Sure. So at Tata Institute, I was working. Sorry. So I was studying a particular protein called transcription factor, which is known to be involved in adult neurogenesis. So usually the brain is an organ which is post-mitotic. That is, it doesn't divide once it is grown. It either degenerates or it dies. So there are particular regions in the brain where neurogenesis or no new neurons are formed, and this transcription factor is like known to be involved in this mechanism. So to explore those kind of mechanisms, we were studying the molecular biology part of it, like using uh, PCR and CRISPR-Cas gene editing system. We are studying the loss of function. Then we are doing a lot of behavior experiments on mice. Like those are like the fun parts because you're going to train the mice to do some experiments, and you're going to like record it and then collect the data and analyze it to see whether the deletion or the upregulation of the gene has any impact on the brain function or the behavior of the uh, in
So,
the mice.
Tata Institute experiments, were they confidential, or are there some things from there that you can talk about? An experiment which you did?
Sure. So that, yeah, that's what, as I mentioned, I was doing a lot of behavior experiments on mice.
So, give
So
me what happens. How do you decide or design one of these experiments?
sure. So I would say I can take an example of one experiment which we did. It is called open field experiment. So what we did was like, so we had this gene inserted on the mice. Like we inject the gene. I mean, so we had, how do I say that? So we had this genetically modified mice, which had this sequence in it, and are using a, there's something called Cree lock system. So you just inject the lock speed, you just inject the drug, it will like cause a deletion in the gene, and then you will train the mice to do a behavior and see whether the loss of function has any impact on the behavior or not. So the experiment was, it was an open field, it was like a box, and you'll just let the mouse inside the box, and we would see whether there is, like, usually mice are susceptible to light. They don't like to be under the light, so they usually go into the corners. So that's a natural behavior of the mice. So once we delete this gene, we will see whether it does its original thing of going into the corners, or does it do anything like crazy. So we saw like with this deletion of the gene, the mice was not going into the corners, and it was just like roaming around in the center. So that's a deviation from its normal behavior. So we used to like collect the data and do the analysis to say like, okay, this deletion of gene has so and so impact. So it could be like translated into some disorders. So for example, this gene was known to be involved in some mental health disorders like schizophrenia or other kind of disease. So people probably with these kind of mutations would not prefer to like engage with a group of people, or they prefer to be alone. So again, so those kind of like physiology we would see in the mice. So that's how like we design these kind of experiments.
Okay. What I see, Siddharth, is that you took the initiative quite a bit. You got your chances, but you also ensured that when you went to those places, you made maximum use of it by asking the questions you wanted to ask, attending the lectures you wanted to attend, and writing to people whether they responded or not. For
Yeah,
example, you said you could have written to Dr. Ghosh and maybe she would have been busy or whatever it is, but the exact time at which you sent in that request and she had something going for you which worked in your favor. This
exactly.
is,
Like yeah,
yeah, this is something that I think young people should do. What is the initiative that you're taking to learn? That must be demonstrable before people just say that, yeah, how will I get experience? And what you just narrated in the past 10 minutes is really about how you acquire that experience while you have 4 years of university or doing the course to learn.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Nobody is holding you back. Nobody is saying, hey, I'm not going to be able to take you on. Yes, there will be rejections. There will be points at which you don't get to hear from people, but you have to just keep trying. That is the ultimate.
exactly. You're not going to lose anything like just by writing an email. And I've written emails to like tons of people, like random people I would write. I mean, random people in the sense like random professors.
Yes, exactly.
I would just make connections. If they reject, I would say like, okay, thank you for the opportunity. Like, I would like to
Right,
reconnect in
right.
the future. I mean,
Yeah.
it's
I
not
think
going.
it's
Yeah,
yeah, I think it's important that they know that you didn't do this to just that one place and then it came through.
no, not at all. I email like left, right, and center. Like
Yeah,
whatever professor I found interesting. Like I
yeah,
mean, that's why like so Twitter is like one of the best places to like
right,
see the professors who are there. So you can just like stalk professors and see what they are doing. So if
right.
interested, you can just like email them, and they're not going to like be like or is it like strict and not
Rude.
like
Yeah, they'll
they're going to
either
be
say, yeah, I don't have the time to do this, or they'll give you a very clear
yeah
indication. And the fact that you write to them
sorry.
is that they know that you exist. That's
Exactly,
an
yeah.
important part of
Yeah. I mean, that too
people
is a
knowing
place
that
like
you're
in
interested
India
in
where
doing
like
this.
there are a lot of people who are like doing similar things what I'm doing. We need to like stand out.
Yeah.
So just one email is not like it's not going to like take anything out of you. So just feel free to like email whatever professor you want.
Okay. You
The,
caught a lucky break because your mother's a teacher and she brought those papers home. But then you read through them. You found out what those papers were about. And I think that's the uh, work that you need to put
I
in
mean,
order to qualify, because otherwise you would not have been able to write that proposal. That's the other part which comes in. That
exactly.
you saw what the papers were about. You imbibed some kind of intelligence from what people were saying, how they wrote those papers, how they structured it. And that's an important part of the learning process.
Exactly. Like if you want to be in science, two things are very important. Curiosity, you need to always be curious to know what is happening and always have the patience and always you need to like learn. So three things are very important if you want to be like a good scientist or be in the science because like
That's
always
true
is a
of
process.
any profession, any job. If you don't have curiosity, you will stop learning at a certain
Yeah,
point and say, okay, I know this. Whereas if you're curious, you'll keep learning. It's as
exactly.
simple as that. So,
Yeah.
so after then, what were the options that you considered to come to the US or apply for a course here?
Sure. So like I got this experience, so I thought like okay, I have everything in my hand now. I can do a PhD. So that's the motive, and that's why I decided like okay, I can apply to US and get a PhD. So I just again started applying, reaching out to professors. Like so, the system is completely different. So in US, you need to like apply to a university, and then you'll get into a PhD program. Whereas in Europe, you need to like first talk to a professor and they should accept you as a student and then you need to like apply to that university.
Okay.
So these are the two things, so I did both. And then so there were professors in Europe who liked my background but they didn't have funding, so they told me like sorry I can take you this year. So in US it was like the university took me in, but so I applied to just like three or four universities, and out of the four, I got rejected from three universities for PhD programs, and one university was Stony Brook. So Stony Brook, why I decided was like, so there was it had a tie up with a research institute called Cold Spring Harbor. So that's where Professor Francis Crick and Watson, who invented the DNA,
Okay.
they were like working. So I was like, okay, I can, if I like get into this university, I can use it to like go and work in Cold Spring Harbor. So I always like, so I don't know like whether this is, so I always wanted to like brand myself. So I have these things like Harvard, Shastra, NCBS. So I was always targeting like big names. So that's why I told like, okay, I can apply to Stony Brook and go into Cold Spring Harbor. But like, so they told me like that year, the year which I applied, they told like they're not taking many PhD students, but they told like we'll give you a master's and you can convert that into PhD if you want later on.
Okay.
So with that, I moved to Stony Brook and did my master's in neuroscience. So that was an amazing period because I started in 2019 and 2020 there was COVID. So everything gone into like break. So sorry. So in 2019, so my master's was a research master's. So I had to like work in a lab, get my master thesis along while doing my coursework. So I got to work with my dean, Dr. Alfredo Fontanini, and he's like one of again a giant in this field. So he was studying taste, like so before coming to his lab, I always knew like taste means just eating, and then like, just like what sweet, salt. So I didn't know like there was a lot happening in your brain, like even for differentiating different taste. So all we know
Yeah.
is the tongue, but there are like different cortical brain regions in your brain which controls all these like distinction between taste. So I was like very much interested in that, and I told like I want to work with you, and like I want to like do all these kind of research in your lab. And one interesting thing which I found was, so my professor, he did his postdoc with a professor who was from NCBS. So when I showed him my resume, he was like, "Oh, you know, you are at NCBS." So the connections like, I
Yeah.
mean, just work like that. So people
Right.
know like what is happening. So
Right.
that was a great thing, and I got to get into his lab, and so I started working on studying a neuropeptide called gastrin-releasing peptide and its role in mediating satiety or feeding. So today you would have been reading about reports like weight loss drug like GLP-1, and those are like making trends. So this is a similar kind of neuropeptide, which is involved in feeding and satiety. So when I started the lab, it was like again an amazing period because I learned. So I had this basic understanding of working with animal models and basic research stuff. But when I moved into his lab, I have to do like surgeries in mice. So I was trained to do neurosurgery in mice. So I was like a neurosurgeon, but for a mice. So that was
Okay.
an amazing period for me because I got to learn, like, get used to like different kind of tools like chemogenetics, like which is like using chemicals to modulate the neural networks, and using light optogenetics to like again control the brain circuit, which I heard first when I was at Harvard Medical School. So everything came into play, and like I was like very much into the research and started doing my research. And unfortunately, due to COVID, all were shut down. So I had to
Okay.
stay like 1 year just not doing any research, just by doing like reading papers and like collecting articles and starting doing my writing stuff. So that one period, that 1 year was like amazing because I got to learn, I mean, read a lot of papers. So that's one thing. If you want to be like a good scientist, you need to have the patience to read the papers, and these papers are like, I
They're
mean,
hard to get through. They're not easy. Yes.
you just fall asleep after like 2 or 3 pages. But yeah,
Yeah.
they were very interesting. Like I got to know like how experiments are designed, and like how do you get the data and how do you read the data. So those are like amazing experience for me. And once when the labs reopened, I just got into my work. I designed my own experiment. So the experiment I designed was like I fed my mice every night a bottle of Ensure, which is like a protein shake, and I would then not give them food for about 12 hours. And then in the morning, I used to like give this drug which we were studying, and seeing whether it motivates the mice to eat more or not. So that's where my research was, and using that I used to study what neuronal regions are involved in feeding, and like whether targeting or like manipulating these brain regions would help with feeding, like promoting feeding or like disrupting feeding or not. So this was my experiment, and it was an amazing time because like my lab was doing amazing research. So one person was doing like how taste is involved in reward system. How do you make decision making in taste? Like how do you decide uh, to choose between like sweet and salt, how your brain separates it. So these were like amazing research. So that period in Stony Brook gave me like a lot of skill set. So I developed a lot of skill set with working with mice doing surgery. So these came handful when I moved into industry.
And then once you finished, what was the step that you took in order to move forward?
Sure. So that's again amazing. So I was at a crossroad at that time to decide whether I need to like do my PhD or get into an industry. And that's where a thought rang in me, like saying like if I had to do a PhD, I would be just like next 6 years just by doing research and like publishing paper which no one is going to read apart from me and my lab members, and I'd be like one among the hundred, one among the millions of paper that gets published every year. So
Okay,
always my motive, I mean, my initial motive or my main motive in my life is to like create an impact or create a value in the society where I'm going to be in. So that's my main driving motivation. So I decided like if I had to do a PhD, the work I'm going to do is not going to get translated. It's not going to be beneficial to the paper, but it's going to be beneficial to the scientific community or the society. So I thought like whether should I do a PhD or should I get into an industry where I can do the same research but it would be having a direct impact on the patient or the people's life. So that's why I decided, okay, I'll just try my hands in research in industry. Then if I don't like, I always have this thing of like coming back and doing a PhD and staying in academia. So that's when
right.
I decided, okay, I'll just make a move and get into industry. And I attended like only like two interviews. So I until this all these times it was only me like discovering all the things because there was no one for me to like look up at and get a advice or like talk to people because there was not anyone in my community who was like moving from academia to industry at that time. So I had no one to like get experience or like get advice. So I just made the decision, okay, I'll just go into the industry and just attended a single interview. And I think that company was Biogen. So Biogen was like one of the biggest biotech companies, and at that time they were the first company to come out with a drug for Alzheimer's. But it had a controversy, and then they had to get back the drug back from the market. So I attended the interview, and I just got a position as a contractor for them for a period of 1.5 years. But
Okay.
when I started, so I was working with them for a
So,
translational.
what was that experience like? What were the kind of questions that you answered, and whom did you meet?
Sure. So the interviews in biotechs are like completely different than any other field. So you don't have to do any experiments to them or like you don't have to solve anything. It's just talking. So you just talk like as if you know everything in the world, like saying like, okay, I did this, I did that, I did this. So it was, I mean, again, I didn't have any prior interview experiences. So I just read what was there in the internet, like how to attend an interview, how to attend a biotech interviews. So they told me like, it should be like a storytelling. Like
Right.
there was some method called STAR, which is like telling about a situation and how you overcame the situation and what was your result. And literally I had nothing in like exciting happening in my academia lab to say a story out of it. So I just told like I got stuck in midst of COVID. My lab was shut down and I just had like a 6 months period to do my research, and I just did that. And the people at Biogen were like very impressed with that, and they were telling like, okay, you have some management skill and you know how to like do your project and do your like research. So it just took me in, and that's why I started. So industry was completely different than what I thought academia was.
Okay.
Sorry.
So, in Biogen, you started with experiments that the company wanted to do. It was There were very clear things that they were looking at.
Yeah. So the team which I joined was called translational biology. So they were looking at designing vehicles which could take the drug into the brain. So the most complex thing about a drug discovery in neuroscience is that there is a thing called blood-brain barrier, which prevents any foreign particles from
Yeah.
getting into the brain. So people were like designing like vehicles like nanoparticles or antibodies which could like shuttle the drug into the brain. So my team role was to like validate all these vehicles using a imaging system called in vivo bioluminescence, which is like tagging the drug with a light molecule.
Luminous, yeah, light particle, which you can then see on screens later.
Exactly, yeah. So that's what I was doing over there, and that
Which
was
I think some of the tests, medical tests that go into the gut and stuff like that, people are trying to figure out. That's one of the things which says, okay, where has the drug gone and
exactly, yeah.
how
You
is
do
it
your
it's
yeah
placed? Right.
thermodynamics, yeah,
Yeah.
pharmacodynamics.
Yeah.
So where
Yeah.
your drug travels. So
Right.
here we are looking at whether the drug enters the brain, and if so, like how long it stays in the brain. So we're doing like a log time scale imaging. And again, here I had to do the same surgery which I was doing, but here the scale was very high. So in academia, I was doing like one or two surgeries a week, whereas here on a single day I had to do like 25 mice. And
Wow.
it was just like a
So
factory.
how long would each surgery take? So you would have to get through to the brain and then sort of put in the required, and each surgery would take roughly how long?
So these were like a what is it like a factory line. So you had like two surgeons and like two assistants. So we had like four stations. So where we get the mice, we open the brain, we inject, and then we move it into the next station. So it was like a factory line. So
Okay.
we used to do like about somewhere around like 40 mice in about like 6.5 hours.
Wow.
So each person would do something around like 15 mice we'll take and we'll inject the drug. So that was like an interesting thing because like I never expected like I would be doing so many surgeries in mice. So that was a great learning for me. And then I also like got to sit in different meetings and like hear the terminologies which scientists speak like DM like there is a different kind of terminology people talk when they're in academia and when they're at
Yeah.
industry. So
In
you
the
just get
corporate
to,
world, it's called jargon, but like you said, it's
yeah,
each field develops its own jargon because when you come across something new which cannot be explained in terms that already exist,
exactly, yeah,
then you sort of use those terms and it starts as lab terms or it
exactly,
starts within. It's the insiders vocabulary. And
yeah,
then it slowly, some of those, like you said, the blood brain barrier, for example, would have started at something inside the lab which says that you can't get through that very easily.
yeah,
And then it becomes something that's people understand when it goes out with papers and the media
exactly.
writes about it. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I was doing at Biogen, and unfortunately, as I mentioned, the drug they developed for Alzheimer was like taken back from the market, and they lost billions of dollars, and they
Okay.
had to like restructure the company and like repurpose their research. So I was again out on the job market, and that's when I joined another company called Eli Lilly, which is like a big pharmaceutical company, and it's known
Yeah.
for its insulin, Prozac, and other field. So I was doing so again, it is in the same Boston area, and they were doing a similar kind of research, but here they were actually working on drugs for actual therapies. So in Biogen, I was working for the delivery vehicles. Here it was more of the drug, the actual drug. So even at Lilly, it was an amazing opportunity for me. I was doing the same thing, but like even more. So at Lilly, it was even more in silos. Like it was too compartmentalized, and like my job was to just sit and inject tons of chemical compounds into the brain and then see whether the drug had any impact or not. So that was my in and out. I mean, like my typical day in a biotech in the pharma industry.
So is this something that, when you started out, you were not very sure that doing research on mice would be something that gave you an edge when you got into the job market there? Because you don't seem to have spent too much of time between getting out of college, getting into Biogen, and getting into Eli Lilly, because it's almost as if there was a definite need for people who had this expertise. on the
Exactly.
market.
So I was not a pro in like working with in vivo animal model because like that was not my background. But like when I came into industry, I got this tag as like a in vivo scientist. So that stuck with me, and like wherever I apply or like I do, this is my skill set, like in vivo neurons, in vivo, like working with animal model. And that was a huge demand because like you have many people with molecular biology, cell biology, but there are like very few people who have this experience with working with mice and doing
Okay.
surgery. So there's like a different kind of like skills.
Yeah, yeah. It's a skill set. While you look at it and you say there are scientists who do this, but if it's
Yeah,
a career and then people are doing that, then it's a skill which you have to acquire. So
exactly.
let's spend just a couple of minutes in terms of expectations of people when they look at how are these internships structured? Are they paid for? What are the early levels? You just give me some broad general directions of what the salaries are like, and then as you move up further up the ladder, what is the potential and possibility?
So actually, these are not my internship. So these are my full time job. So
Okay,
so the ideal thing in US is like sorry, when you come up with your masters or your undergrad, you get into industry in the research side, you'll be getting into as an associate scientist. That's below a scientist. And usually the pay scale is somewhere ranging between 75 to like 100K, depending on the kind of industry you are in. So a pharmaceutical company like Lilly or Pfizer would have a different pay scale, and startups and biotech would have a different pay scale. So the ladder, the career ladder is like very limited if you don't have a PhD, because only if you have a PhD, you have this thing of like getting into becoming more scientist and climbing up the ladder to be like a chief scientist or like a what is it called, the CSO, the chief scientific officer. So you need a PhD if you want to like continue or have a career
finally get there.
in
Okay,
research. But that's when my again my career trajectory happened. So at Lilly, the one of the greatest thing is like it's a great big organization, so you get to witness different teams at work. So we were like preclinical research. There are teams who do the uh, like clinical research, that is working on clinical trials with human. Then there is a finance team who works on like identifying new companies to acquire or venture capital. So they invest in new companies. And then business development, like looking for like how to like make your project. I mean, how to manage your drug discovery and like how do you take it into a market. So there are like different teams within the entire organization. And the one good thing about working in these companies, like you have these lunch hours with them where they will sit and explain what kind of work they are doing, and you can just talk
okay,
with them and have a conversation. So these were like very amazing because when I came into an industry, I had no idea like how an industry is or like what to expect in an industry. I just went with an open mind, not knowing like what exactly I want to be. And I was into like I just got into this field, and I just got into this role, and I was just doing it. And these gave me an opportunity to like know like the other dimensions of a industry. And that's where I became interested in the non-research part of the industry, like the finance or the business development, or like how do you do a landscape analysis to look at where your competitors are and how you are going to like market your drug. Because two things are very important when you discover or when you develop a drug. It should be first in class, which means like it's a unique drug, or best in class, which means like it is not unique but it is more effective than the drug which is in the market. So there's always this competition for these two spots in drug discovery. And so many companies, when they come up with a research program, they do all these kind of research. And that's when I read like, okay, there are like consulting firms, not the big fours. Like I mean, even McKinsey's and other BCG
right.
do these kind of things, but there are like boutique firms which are concentrated in doing these kind of things for biotech industry. So I got interested in that, and I told like, okay, I need to step back, get into academia, but not do a PhD, but do something related to the management aspect. And that's where I got to like quit my company and then do a master's in biotech management and entrepreneurship from Ishiva University in New York, which I'm currently doing. So this like looks at the business aspect of the biotech industry, like how do you develop a product, like how do you manage the product, like the ip, the regulations. So how do you like interact with the fda, like what are the steps required, and like how do you run the clinical trials. So these are very important aspects where you don't require the research skill.
So, is this something that has come up fairly recently, or are these courses, they've been around for some time?
So I would say these courses have been, but I didn't know about this before.
Okay.
So usually like for like when you come with your research, you just get into the preclinical research. But like there are particular, like for example, if there are, I'm going to run a clinical trial, it's usually done by md phds or doctors who are like who have a doctor degree and they do it. Or there are like a master's program where you just focus on regulatory aspect. So there you learn about the different fda, like the rules and laws, and how do you communicate, how do you write the letters. So there are masters which are like specializing in these kind of things. So there the field is like now opening up. And then I mean, so one way to like get into these kind of sectors is with experience, and the other way around is like doing this kind of degree and like going back into the industry.
Okay. So, is this, would you say it's 50-50 business versus the industry learnings, and how do you evaluate versus how do you build a business around it? How is the course structured, and what is the fee? How easy I'm going to ask you a few basic questions because people who are interested would know that something like this exists and
Sure.
what they need to do.
So the fees is like similar to like other masters program, around like 50 to like if you're coming from India, it would cost you like 50 to 60,000 dollars. If it's like a ivy universities like NYU or Columbia, otherwise with the public university it'd be like around 30 to 40,000 dollars. So there's a
Okay.
fee structure. And what was the other question?
Yeah, in terms of the syllabus or the curriculum, is it oriented more towards industry, understanding the industry, and business,
Sure.
entrepreneurship?
So my master's is in biotech management and entrepreneurship. So it's focused on biotech industry. So it's like master's in management with a focus in biotech. So whatever I read, the management, it's all related to like the drug discovery part. So for example, when I talk about product development course, it's about like how do you start developing the company, and like how do you develop an asset. So an asset here is like a drug. So how do you de-risk the asset at every stage, how do you pitch it to an investor, and like how do you like how do you write the pitch deck to the investor, and what they expect, how much you need to like know how to calculate how much is going to cost for each step in the discovery process, and different IP laws. Like how do you, I mean, because the important thing in drug discovery is the IP or the intellectual property. So you need to know like exactly how to apply to them, and like what are the laws, and like how can you like negotiate to extend the IP, or like how do you like gain more out of these IP, the regulatory laws, like what are the different FDA approvals it's required, and like how long it's going to take for the approval process, and how to write a label. So these are like different kind of things when it comes to like in the biotech industry is very important, because not the research doesn't stop only with like researching a drug. You need to take it to a market. That's when it's completed. So these are like very important. Since I had this industry experience, so I know exactly like what the process happens in an industry, and now I'm applying it with my management and business program. Like, how do I like utilize it? Like, how do I like suppose if a company is stuck in say a clinical trial process, so how do I advise them? Like, what are the what they can de-risk, or like how they can like move forward, or like what options do they have. So these are some things like very valuable, and we have some case studies like similar to a Harvard Business School. Like you have cases, and you learn like what previous scientists have done. So you read about them. You read about entrepreneurs, so how they built their company. So this is like an amazing course where you give like a more perspective on like the management aspect. But like if you have this prior industry experience, it's very easy for you. And if you don't have, it's okay. Like you can learn, and then again you get your industry and learn, and then you can utilize it.
So, is it a 1 year course or a 2 year
So
course?
it's
It's
a
a one
similar
year,
master's program, 2 years course.
two years. Okay. Okay, so then you finish the course, you post that, or what
No,
is the current? You currently doing it, and which
sorry.
when do you finish the course?
So I'll be like finishing my course next year, but
Okay,
like along my course, I'm doing different kind of like freelance and internships. So I'm working for a venture capital firm, which is like looking to invest in different biotech companies. So I do the due diligence part, which is like, I mean, so when you hear about venture capital, all we think is like people in like in Shark Tank just sitting there and writing checks, but that's not it.
yeah,
There is more to it. Like there is a team of like analysts who sit behind and like do a due diligence part, like looking at the science of a company, looking at the market, and then looking at the landscape, like how big the therapy or the disease areas they're going to like work with, and then you're going to look at their like finance, like what they're asking for. So these are some things which is very important. And I think you don't just need to have a finance background to be a venture capital analyst. You can even have like a technical knowledge, and which is very handy. And you can use a technical knowledge to like do the due diligence part, write the investment memo, like saying this is a company, this is a therapy, and this is what they're going to do. And then you can do a projection like how successful it's going to be, and like should we invest or not, and then pitch it to a partner who will take the final decision. So these are something which I find like very interesting, because now I'm not only restricted to neuroscience, so now I'm like open to all the field. So I get to learn new technologies, I get to learn like what's happening, like the current technologies, and it's like getting a front seat on
front row
discovery,
seat. Yes,
discovery part. And that's very exciting for me, because as I mentioned, to be a scientist you need to be curious and learning, and that's what I'm
yeah,
currently.
yeah. And I guess the other aspect of this is that there is this point of being at the right place at the right time. And let's say 10 years ago, when the human genome had just been sort of mapped,
Yeah,
nobody expected that this would happen so quickly, that gene editing and gene therapy would get to be
yeah, exactly.
such huge markets.
Yeah, I think this year only like the first gene therapy for called CRISPR Cas got
Yeah.
approval, and it's there in the market. It's like around $3 million. But like
Yes.
again, that's amazing what it is doing, but like still there's a long way to go forward. But yeah, so these are the kind of like technologies which we see, and like there are many companies which are working on different new kinds of gene therapy. So you get to like look at those technology and then see, like make a projection, like whether it's going to work or not, whether the science is strong solid or not, how they're going to like translate it, how they're going to like do the research. So these are something like you get to learn when you are like in the venture capital side, or like or even in a consulting firm. So like I mentioned, boutique consulting firms and taking people like me with these kind of background, so that like we can help companies with like doing helping them with the management, like how do you manage your drug delivery program, or like if it comes through all level, how we're going to price it. So pricing is very important. So whether you do a value based pricing, like how they did for CRISPR, like it's going
That's
to
how they do it. Okay.
be,
So,
yeah.
from your original class at Shastra, how many people have taken the route that you have, or you're one of the very, very few people who has gone in this path? What are some of your other friends doing,
Ah,
classmates?
it's a great thing. So I would say like um I would say most of, I mean not most, like about like 10-15% of the people who had studied along with me, they are doing their PhDs. So few are in like US and few are in like other countries, and they are into doing the PhD and doing, they want to be in academia. And I'm like a very few person who didn't do a PhD but got into an industry, and now again coming back to the industry and doing this kind of like job. So I would say like I am the first person who's doing this management in biotech, like focusing on the biotech industry. So I mean, even
Yeah.
I didn't even
It's
think like I would be doing
like you
this.
said right in the beginning, you said that you didn't know of too many other people to whom to ask for. And it's just that because you went into each one of these places, you got to see
Exactly.
another option, another opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you found that research need not be, or this particular field alone need not be your career goal.
Exactly, yeah.
There's
So I
so
got
much more that you can explore.
exactly, yeah. So I got to like work or like dip my feet in like one of the best institutes around the world. Like I got to do my research at Harvard, NCBS, or work with Stony Brook or big companies like Lilly or Biogen, which I wouldn't have thought when I was like at Chennai. Like I would be doing all these kind of things. But these were like great experience for me, and I got to like see a first-hand knowledge of like, okay, this is what happens. So I would say like, okay, this is what I experienced. So what next? So that would always be like ringing in my mind, like how do I like go? Because like unlike other field in industry, biotech industry, the job security is like very poor. So when a drug fails or when your drug fails, the company would like invariably shut down and like they would just like let go people. So when those kind of situations happen, you need to have something in your hand, like a differentiated skill, like which would differentiate you with different people. So I think it's very important. Like even when you are in an industry, you just learn and like upskill yourself as much as possible, and be like have all the wealth of knowledge in your hand where you can apply it. So that's what I'm doing currently, and like I don't know where it's going to take me, but
So in your in Shastra, is the bioengineering and biomedical, the biotech course still a very popular course?
I would say like the biotechnology. I mean, so Shastra offers bioengineering, biotechnology, and bioinformatics, and all these three courses are popular. So I have my own cousins who are doing biotechnology at Shastra, and they're following
Okay.
my step. I mean, like I didn't influence them or like give advice, but they are doing what I'm doing currently, like following my path. So it's widely popular, and Shastra is like it's since it's like a private university, you have this like an opportunity to like learn the latest, like what's happening currently. You get to like read about them, like stem cells or be it even gene editing, which I think that's not possible in any other institutes. So Shastra would prepare for you for that, but it's all up to you, like what you like decide, like whether you want to like read more or like upskill. Like
Yeah.
I mean, like
Yeah.
always you need to like read, go beyond your education. Like so for me, the learning, uh, like the mode has been always podcast. So I
Yeah.
always like listen to different kind of podcasts or like watch different kind of videos and like learn to know like what exactly is happening in the industry, and like so these are always helpful for me, and it keeps me up to date or like what's going to happen, so I can talk with any people. So that's very important.
And that is something that not too many people in your age group do, isn't it, Siddharth? It is, there is a point at which they think that, oh, research papers, this is something that is too obscure, too hard to get through. You have to get over that initial problem of figuring out how to concentrate, because these are not, they don't make it easy for you to get the information. You
Okay.
have to work at it.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of an attitude. And do you think that this is something that your parents kind of inculcated in you, or it's something that you felt because you were able to do it without your parents forcing you into a certain.
I mean, my parents, they still have no idea of like what I'm doing today. So they're just like a support system, and they always like support whatever idea I do
That's
or what
great.
things I
I
do.
mean, that's the best that they can do,
Yeah,
because if they stand behind you, it means that their trust, and you will repay the trust in hordes.
exactly. Yeah. So I mean, so they were there. I mean, whatever crazy idea or ideas I had or like whatever decisions I made, they're like just go and do it, and they never like inculcated any like reading stuff or like those kind of things. But only when so in Shastra, even like the first 3 years I was not into like research or like reading papers, but when I moved into Harvard, when I told you, like the scene totally changed. So in there is a differentiation between the universities in India and in US. So in US it's mostly like a vocational kind of learning, or like
Right.
you do like more research based learning right from your second year onwards. So you always have these like a reading, your scientific reading happening from the second year, but in India it's not the thing. So when I came to Harvard, I was given the first day I was given like 10 set of paper to read, and I was just like stare at it, not knowing like what to do. And then like when I had no other choice, I started reading, and then I was like, okay, this is very interesting. What they're doing next. So that's how like I got the interest. And invariably, like when you're into a research or being a scientist, you have to read paper. You have no other choice.
Yes. Yes.
So
And even in your current the course that you're taking up,
yeah,
it means that you have to be on top of industry trends.
exactly. Yeah,
You have to be on top of uh, things that are happening in the finance market,
exactly.
because
Like you
that
need
is
to.
the additional bit that you now have to master, or at least understand, if not master.
Yeah, I'm like attending a lot of conference calls like companies put out when they have a new announcement. So I do that. Then I read their S2 filings, which is very important because that's where they, if they have any result from the clinical trial, they just update it there. And then go through the stocks, what they're doing, what the analysts in different financial companies are saying about the company. So these are very important. And also like when I'm into a venture capital, I need to like read papers a lot to see what new ideas there, and like whether I can pitch it to my partner saying like this is like going to be like a good investment option. If so, they'll
Right.
like read it and like give a investment memo or like write a thesis on like why I should invest in it. So yeah, reading is going to be there along. It's going to be
All the time. Great, Siddharth. I think you have really taken pivoted on what people generally think is a career in biotechnology.
yeah,
And in this particular episode, you've also shown how there is potential in pursuing the financial aspect, the technical aspects, and the business aspects of biology, because of biotechnology, because any field of research ultimately has to make market sense,
exactly.
and only then will it propagate and spread and all of these things. And as you mentioned, the early products that have come out are in the region of $3 million and $4 million a dose, which makes it uh, affordable to a very, very small fraction of people.
Exactly. Yeah.
But going forward,
Sorry.
it will then become a lot more accessible as the technology develops and ways to bring the costs down are explored.
Yeah.
So,
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, you can look at it two ways. So, one is like you're getting a drug which is going to like
yeah,
change your life. Like you're going to be free of the disease. So it's okay
right.
to pay. And on the other hand, if you're looking at the cost, then I mean, it's like a cost benefit
Yes, yes.
comparison, I guess.
Ultimately, that's a very hard. It gets into morality and various other points, which I don't think we can explore at this.
Yeah, that's a
This
kind
is
of
more
dimension which I'm
career. Yeah,
looking at. Whether when people say the biotech companies or the pharma are like cheating people or like scamming people, I would say like they are putting in like 10 to 15 years of like work and shedding, I mean, investing like 3 to 4 billion money. They need to like
yeah.
recoup it, right?
Right.
And
Very true.
it's true.
Great. So let me wish you the very best, Siddharth. Thank you for appearing on the episode. Here's wishing you
Yeah,
the
sure.
very best going forward. It is a pleasure talking to you,
Sure.
and it's great to know that how you have understood the business and understood your strengths in terms of how you'll build a career. All the best for the future.
Thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you, Doctor. Thank you.
Wonderful. That was Siddarth Swaminathan, and he, of course, is exploring a new realm in biotechnology. Thank you, as always, for listening, and we'll bring you back on another episode next week.